The night she fell silent, everyone thought she'd never wake up again. Her husband, the man who once promised to protect her, became the reason she lay in a coma, bruised and broken. For months he walked free, convinced his secret would stay buried. But fate was already moving. Thousands of miles away, a soldier received a call he never expected. His sister, the one he hadn't seen since deployment, was fighting for her life. When he came home, he didn't come back as a brother. He came back as a storm. And when her husband opened the door one night and saw who stood there, he realized that his worst nightmare had just come home. The sun slipped behind the hills, leaving the farmhouse in a wash of amber light. Inside, Naomi Carter moved quietly through the kitchen, her motions careful and practiced, like someone who had learned that silence could keep the peace. Every sound felt measured, the click of a cabinet, the hiss of a kettle, the whisper of her breath. From the outside, her life looked perfect. A pretty house, a husband with influence in town, neat flower beds out front. But inside those walls lived something colder, control that wore a smile. Her husband, Ethan, was a respected contractor, polite in public, generous at church. When people saw them together, they said things like, "Naomi's so lucky." She'd just nod, because that was easier than telling the truth. Luck had nothing to do with it. Over the years, he'd taken little pieces of her choices, her laughter, her friends. He'd convinced her to quit her nursing job so she could focus on home. He read her messages, questioned her every errand, always saying it was love. She wanted to believe that once. But love doesn't feel like a cage. That evening, Naomi's hands trembled as she poured tea. The bruise on her wrist was faint, already fading, but it burned like a reminder. She needed to leave before something truly broke. She had planned for weeks. A small bag under the bed, documents hidden in an old shoebox, a prepaid phone tucked inside her apron pocket. Tomorrow, when Ethan went to the city for work, she would run. To a shelter a friend had quietly told her about. She would start over, even if it meant disappearing. But fate had a strange way of weaving its own script. Far away, in a desert camp half a world from home, Captain Marcus Carter stood under the metallic hum of helicopters. Dust swirled around him as he received a message from his commanding officer. "Captain, it's urgent. Your sister's been hospitalized." The words hit harder than any battlefield sound. He hadn't seen Naomi in 3 years. Not since deployment. Not since their last call where she laughed and said, "I'm fine, Marcus, really." He'd believed her. Because he needed to. The letter didn't say much, only that she'd been found unconscious and was now in a coma. The doctors were hopeful but uncertain. Marcus closed his eyes. Memories came in flashes. The two of them as kids, sneaking cookies from their mother's kitchen, her laughter echoing down the hallway. He remembered the promise he'd made before he left for the army, to always protect her. He'd failed once. He wouldn't again. Back at the farmhouse, the night air thickened with unease. Ethan arrived late, smelling of cologne and ego, tossing his jacket across the couch. "Dinner ready?" he called. Naomi forced a smile and nodded. On the table. He didn't notice the packed bag under the bed. He didn't see the quiet strength building behind her tired eyes. He only saw what he wanted. Control. Later, as he turned on the television, Naomi stepped onto the porch, phone in hand. She texted one message to her best friend, Lydia, the only person who still checked on her. "If I don't show up tomorrow." Something went wrong. She pressed send, her heart racing. Inside, the TV flickered with news footage. Reports of soldiers returning home. Ethan muttered something about heroes and their egos. Naomi froze at the word soldier. A faint hope stirred in her chest, one she hadn't felt in years. Half a world away, Marcus boarded the first plane home. He didn't know the full story, just that Naomi had been hurt, but his instinct screamed there was more. He'd seen too much of human cruelty to believe in coincidences. As the plane lifted, Marcus looked out the window. "Hold on, little sis," he whispered. "I'm coming." Back in the hospital, machines beeped softly beside Naomi's bed. Her face looked peaceful, her hands folded neatly, but inside a fight was happening. A will to survive stronger than any pain. Somewhere between dreams and darkness she heard voices. Nurses, footsteps, the click of a door. And then faintly a deeper sound. a man's voice filled with disbelief. Naomi, my God. Marcus stood frozen at the doorway, the sight of his sister breaking every layer of armor he'd built as a soldier. He reached for her hand, whispering, I'm here. It's me. The doctor's voice followed gently. She's stable but unresponsive. She suffered trauma and severe shock. Recovery is possible, but we don't know when she'll wake up. Marcus nodded, eyes wet but focused. She will. She's a Carter. We don't give up. As the doctor left, he turned toward the small bouquet on the bedside table. A card was attached. One line written in Ethan's handwriting. Get well soon. Come home soon. Marcus's jaw tightened. He read it again, slower this time. The tone wasn't love. It was ownership. He folded the card and slipped it into his pocket. For the first time in years, he felt the old soldier's calm return, the kind that comes right before a storm. Outside the hospital window, thunder rolled. Rain covered the parking lot as Marcus stepped outside the hospital. It had been years since he'd felt this kind of helplessness, the kind that no amount of training could fight. The city lights blurred behind the drizzle, but his purpose was sharp. Find the truth. He started quietly. He spoke with the nurses who admitted Naomi, the neighbor who found her, and the officer who filed the report. Each version of the story was short, hesitant, too careful. Nobody wanted to accuse Ethan openly. His reputation in town ran deep, but behind every polite pause, Marcus heard the same fear. They all knew more than they dared to say. He returned to the hospital every morning, reading to Naomi, updating her on the world outside. The maple tree's already turning red, he'd tell her. You always said fall was your favorite. Sometimes her fingers twitched. The doctors said it was reflex, but Marcus believed it was will. One afternoon, a soft-spoken nurse named Ella lingered by the doorway after checking Naomi's IV. Captain Carter, she whispered. Your sister had bruises that weren't from a single accident. I shouldn't say this, but please be careful. Her husband doesn't like questions. Marcus met her eyes and nodded once. Thank you. You did right by her. That evening he drove to the farmhouse. The place looked the same as in childhood photographs, but the warmth was gone. The front porch light flickered. The garden lay untended. He knocked. Ethan opened the door, surprise flashing before a practiced smile slid into place. Marcus, you're back. How's our girl? Marcus studied him quietly. The spotless shirt, the rehearsed calm, the eyes that never quite met his. She's fighting, he said. Doctors think she'll wake up. Ethan's smile faltered for a heartbeat. That's good news. They talked on the porch, words circling like wary dogs. Ethan blamed stress, claimed Naomi overworked herself, changed the subject too often. Marcus kept his voice measured. Every soldier learns that silence can be more dangerous than shouting. Before leaving, Marcus looked past him into the living room. A single photo sat on the mantel, their wedding picture. Naomi's smile looked genuine, but her hand rested stiffly on Ethan's arm, not through it. He memorized that image. Over the next week, Marcus visited old friends, called in quiet favors. A contact at the local precinct confirmed his suspicions. Police had been called to the Carter home twice in the last year, both times accidents. Reports never advanced. Each was signed off by a senior officer who happened to play golf with Ethan. Marcus exhaled slowly. Corruption wasn't new to him, but this was personal. Still, he didn't act in anger. He acted in structure. He met with Naomi's friend Lydia, gathered messages, voicemails, even bank records showing Naomi's hidden savings, and the shelter address she never reached. Piece by piece, a picture formed, not of a helpless victim, but of a woman who had tried to save herself. Then we finish what she started, Marcus said. Lydia looked at him, frightened yet hopeful. He's powerful here, Marcus. I've faced worse, he replied, voice steady. But this time I'm not carrying a weapon. I'm carrying truth. At the hospital, Naomi's condition shifted. Her eyes fluttered, lips moving soundlessly. Marcus squeezed her hand. Naomi, it's me. You're safe. A single tear slid from the corner of her eye, the first sign of returning light. He leaned close. Rest. I'll make sure the world hears you. 2 days later, Ethan hosted a charity dinner. Cameras, donors, the mayor. He spoke smoothly about family values. What he didn't know was that Marcus had handed every gathered record, photo, and report to a local journalist he once served beside. The next morning, headlines spread across town. Contractor's wife in coma. After months of reported abuse, officials re-examine case. Phones rang non-stop. Ethan's office flooded with reporters. The same people who once praised him now kept their distance. For the first time, his perfect mask cracked. Marcus didn't celebrate. He sat beside Naomi's bed reading the paper aloud. "Looks like truth travels faster than lies," he murmured. Her fingers twitched again. Late that night, Ethan appeared at the hospital, desperate and pale. "You think ruining me helps her?" he hissed. Marcus stood calm but immovable. "No, protecting her does. The rest is your own doing," a nurse's voice echoed from the hallway. "Security's on the way." "Sir," Ethan backed off, shaking his head. And left without another word, Marcus exhaled, shoulders relaxing for the first time since he'd landed. Justice wasn't finished, but the silence that had trapped his sister was broken at last. He sat back down, holding her hand again. "You can rest now," he whispered. "The storm's over." Outside, dawn began to brighten the horizon. Morning light spilled into the hospital room, soft and golden. Machines hummed their steady rhythm beside Naomi's bed. Marcus had dozed off in the chair when a faint sound made him open his eyes. It wasn't the machines. It was her. Naomi's fingers twitched again, this time stronger. Her lips parted slightly. A sound escaping that was more breath than voice, but it was real. Marcus was on his feet instantly, calling the nurse. Disbelief and hope tangled together in his throat. Within seconds, staff rushed in. Monitors beeped faster. Doctors murmuring medical terms Marcus barely heard. He just stared, unblinking, afraid that if he moved, the fragile miracle would stop. Then her eyes fluttered open. It wasn't a full awakening, more like a glimpse through a storm, but her gaze found him. Recognition flickered. Marcus's hand trembled as he took hers. "It's me," he whispered, voice cracking. "It's your brother. You're safe now." A tear slid down her cheek, and that one tear felt heavier than any medal he'd ever earned. Over the next few days, Naomi drifted in and out of awareness. Words came slowly. Memories blurred at the edges. Sometimes she'd panic when she saw the door open, fearing Ethan would walk in. Marcus reassured her every time. "He won't hurt you again," he said firmly. "He doesn't have that power anymore." With time, Naomi began to remember, not just what happened, but who she was before the silence. Her laughter returned in small doses. Her voice, though faint, carried strength. During physical therapy, she whispered one day, "Marcus, why didn't you tell me you were coming back?" "I didn't know you needed me," he replied quietly. "And that's on me." She gave him a small, forgiving smile. "You came when I did." Meanwhile, outside the hospital walls, the world began to crumble for Ethan. The article had sparked a fire that couldn't be contained. A local news station aired interviews with neighbors, colleagues, and former clients. One after another, people who once stayed silent began to speak. The police reopened Naomi's case, and this time, the oversight committee demanded every missing report and file. Ethan's company contracts were suspended. Sponsors withdrew from his charity events. Even his closest allies refused to return his calls. The man who built his life on image found himself standing on nothing but lies. Marcus didn't need to lift a finger. Truth was doing the work. One evening, Naomi sat by the window in her hospital room watching the sunset. Her brother read a book beside her, but she could tell his mind was elsewhere. "You're thinking about him," she said softly. Marcus looked up. "I'm thinking about you. How strong you were to survive." She turned to face him. "You're angry. I can see it. But don't let him live in your head, Marcus. I already let him live in mine for too long." Her words hit him deeper than any battlefield lesson ever had. From that day, Marcus shifted his focus. Instead of plotting exposure or confrontation, he started documenting Naomi's journey, her recovery, her resilience, her story. With her permission, he sent parts of it to the same journalist who'd broken the first article. They wanted to show the world not a victim, but a survivor. By the time Naomi was discharged, the hospital staff lined the hall to cheer her out. The woman who had once been brought in silent and broken was now walking out, leaning lightly on a cane, her head high. Marcus held the door open. "Ready to go home?" She smiled faintly. Not back there. Let's find a new one. They rented a small apartment near the city's edge, quiet with sunlight pouring through every window. Naomi painted again, something she hadn't done in years. Marcus started volunteering at a veterans outreach center, channeling his energy into helping others rebuild. But the world wasn't done with Ethan Carter. The reopened case revealed falsified police reports and financial fraud tied to his company. He was called in for questioning, and while the system moved slowly, it moved steadily. Every truth Marcus and Naomi had unearthed stacked like bricks in a wall of accountability. Still, Marcus wasn't driven by revenge anymore. His purpose had changed. Watching Naomi paint her first new canvas, swirls of sunrise orange and calm blue, he realized that justice wasn't about punishment. It was about peace, and weeks passed. The story caught national attention. A soldier's return brings light to domestic injustice, one headline read. Viewers connected deeply with Naomi's strength, sending messages, letters, donations. She used the money not for herself, but to help fund a local shelter. In one interview, her voice still soft but sure, she said, I don't want anyone else to wait for a hero to come save them. Sometimes, survival is the act of heroism. Marcus watched from behind the camera, pride swelling quietly. One night, after the interview aired, Naomi sat with her brother on the balcony. The city below glittered, alive and loud. You ever wonder why we go through what we do? She asked. Marcus thought for a long moment. So someone else won't have to, he said. Naomi smiled. Maybe that's why you came back. Elsewhere, Ethan sat alone in his once luxurious home, the walls echoing with emptiness. He'd been publicly disgraced, his assets frozen, his influence gone. The silence that used to belong to Naomi now belonged to him. For the first time, he had to live with the echo of his own actions. And yet, Naomi didn't celebrate his fall. When she heard about his court date, she told Marcus, let the law handle him. My healing doesn't depend on his suffering. That single sentence defined the woman she'd become. Months later, Naomi stood before a small crowd at the shelter she helped fund. The plaque behind her read, The Horizon Center for Survivors Finding Their Tomorrow. She looked out at the faces before her, women, children, families who'd escaped their own dark chapters, and began to speak. Pain can make you feel like you've lost everything, she said. But sometimes pain clears the space for strength to grow. My brother taught me that family isn't just who you're born with. It's who stands up for you when the world goes quiet. Her words brought tears to many eyes, including Marcus's. When she stepped off the stage, he met her with a hug that said everything words couldn't. As the evening sun melted into gold, Marcus and Naomi walked home through the park. Kids laughed in the distance, leaves rustled softly, and for the first time in a long time, life felt simple again. Naomi looked up. You think people can really change? Marcus smiled faintly. Maybe not all, but people can heal, and that's what matters. They walked in silence for a while until Naomi whispered, Thank you for coming back. I never really left, he said. Above them, the sky stretched wide and forgiving, like a promise finally kept. The courthouse was crowded. Reporters lined the marble steps, cameras flashing like lightning. For months, the story had grown from a whisper to a storm. Today, it would end. Marcus stood beside Naomi as they entered through the back entrance. She walked slowly, the faint trace of her cane tapping against the floor. But her head was high and her eyes, though tired, were clear. She wore a simple cream dress, no jewelry, no theatrics. She didn't come to perform. She came to speak. Inside, the room buzzed with murmurs. On the left sat Ethan, in a suit that didn't fit as well as it used to. His lawyer whispered frantically beside him. He didn't look powerful anymore, just small, like a man trying to hide in plain sight. Naomi took her seat beside the prosecutor. Marcus sat directly behind her, a silent wall of strength. When the judge entered, everyone rose. Then, as the proceedings began, the world grew still. The prosecution played recordings, her friend Lydia's testimony, police dispatch logs, the nurse's written statement. Each piece fit together like a puzzle of truth that could no longer be ignored. Then came the moment everyone waited for. Mrs. Carter, the judge said gently, Are you ready to testify? Naomi took a slow breath. The courtroom air felt heavy, but she didn't flinch. She stood, adjusted her scarf, and walked toward the witness stand. Every step echoed. After swearing in, she looked around, at the judge, at the jury, at the man who once called her wife. Ethan's eyes darted toward her, but she didn't return the gaze. Instead, she looked forward and began. At first, she said softly, he was kind, gentle, the kind of man who makes you believe in beginnings. Her voice trembled slightly but steadied as she continued. But kindness that demands silence isn't kindness. It's control. I didn't see it then. I thought if I just loved harder, obeyed better, apologized faster, it would stop. The courtroom was utterly still. Not even the clicking of a pen broke the silence. When he took my voice, I learned to write. When he took my smile, I learned to paint. And when he took my safety, her breath hitched. I learned to pray. She paused, eyes glistening, but lifted her chin. The night I ended up in the hospital, I thought it was the end. But it wasn't. It was the beginning of a story I didn't know was still being written. Her gaze softened as she turned slightly toward Marcus. Because my brother came home. Marcus blinked hard, hiding the moisture in his eyes. The defense attorney rose for cross-examination but hesitated. Every word Naomi spoke carried the weight of truth, calm and measured. There was nothing to twist or break. After a few half-hearted questions, the lawyer sat down. The judge thanked her gently. Mrs. Carter, you may step down. Naomi nodded, her step steady as she returned to her seat. The moment she sat, Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. She didn't look back, but she didn't need to. His presence was enough. The court adjourned for recess. Outside, whispers filled the halls. Journalists, onlookers, victims of similar pain. But Naomi didn't hear any of it. She only felt relief. When they stepped outside for a breath of air, Marcus said quietly, "You did it." She smiled faintly. "No, we did." He shook his head. "No, Naomi. This was all you." The final verdict came 2 days later. Ethan Carter was found guilty on multiple counts: assault, coercion, falsification of records, and obstruction of justice. Sentencing would follow, but the verdict itself was enough. When the judge read the decision, Ethan's shoulders slumped. The man who once spoke with arrogance now stared at the floor, eyes dull, realizing that the world he built on control had finally crumbled. Naomi didn't gloat. She didn't even look at him. She simply closed her eyes and whispered something to herself that only Marcus could hear. Freedom doesn't need revenge. That night, back at their apartment, the TV replayed the verdict. Commentators calling her testimony a turning point in the fight for survivors' justice. Marcus switched off the screen. "I don't need to see it," Naomi said, smiling softly. "I lived it," he chuckled. "Fair point." She leaned against him on the couch. For the first time in years, the silence around them wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. Weeks passed. Life began to feel normal again. Naomi started volunteering full-time at the Horizon Center. She became a mentor, not through lectures but through listening. Women came to her not because she was famous, but because she understood. One afternoon, a teenage girl came into the shelter, frightened and unsure. Naomi sat with her for hours. When the girl finally said, "I just want to feel safe," Naomi smiled and replied, "You will. And when you do, you'll help someone else feel it too. That's how healing keeps going." The girl nodded, tears in her eyes. Later that evening, Marcus joined Naomi at the park, the same park they'd walked through months earlier. Children played in the distance, autumn leaves drifting like gold coins in the air. "Feels different now," Marcus said. "Because it is," Naomi replied. "This is peace." He looked at her, truly looked. She seemed lighter, whole. The scars hadn't vanished, but they'd become part of her story. Not the end, but proof of survival. "You ever going back to painting?" he asked. Naomi smiled. "I already did." "Want to see?" She opened her sketchbook. On the page was a painting of a sunrise over a quiet sea, colors melting from darkness to gold. In the corner, 2 figures stood side by side, one holding a cane, the other in uniform. "Us," he said, smiling. "Us," she nodded. "The storm and the calm." That night, as the city lights shimmered beyond their window, Naomi wrote in her journal for the first time since the hospital. "Some stories end in pain, but mine didn't." It ended in truth. And truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. You survived. She closed the notebook, placed it on the table, and looked out at the stars. Marcus joined her, silent, watching the same sky they used to watch as kids. Naomi, he said quietly. You think Mom would be proud? Naomi smiled. I think she already is. They stood there for a while. Two souls who had been through darkness and still chose light. And somewhere in the quiet, the past finally let go. 5 years later, the town had changed. The courthouse that once echoed with whispers of Naomi Carter's trial now held awareness programs for survivors. The same news channels that once broadcast her pain now celebrated her victory. But Naomi didn't care for headlines anymore. Her name had become a symbol, yes, but she'd learned that healing doesn't live in applause. It lives in quiet mornings, soft laughter, and peace you don't have to explain. She stood before a wide mural on the wall of the Horizon Center, a painting she'd created herself. It showed a sunrise breaking over a field of flowers, each petal carrying the initials of women who found hope here. At the bottom, in small, neat letters, she'd signed, "To every survivor, you are not your scars." The center had grown beyond what she imagined. There were now 3 branches across the state. Marcus handled security coordination, ensuring every shelter was safe and discreet. Naomi led art therapy and mentorship programs. Together, they'd built something out of pain, something that couldn't be destroyed. That morning, she walked through the hallway as laughter spilled from one of the rooms. Inside, a group of children sat painting with their mothers, women rebuilding their lives. Naomi paused in the doorway, smiling quietly. A little girl noticed her and waved. "Miss Naomi, look, I made a sunrise like yours." Naomi knelt beside her. The painting was messy, uneven, but full of light. "It's beautiful," she said. "You even got the colors right." The girl grinned. "Mom says you helped her find her light again." Naomi felt her throat tighten. She brushed the girl's hair back gently. "Your mom did that herself, sweetheart. I just reminded her where to look." Later that day, Marcus arrived at the center, sleeves rolled up, clipboard in hand. "We got final approval for the outreach grant," he said with a grin. Naomi raised her eyebrows. "Already?" "That was fast. Guess they liked the proposal," she chuckled. "You mean the one you stayed up all night editing?" He shrugged, pretending modesty. "Team effort?" They walked outside to the small garden behind the building, Naomi's favorite place. The air smelled like lavender and rain. Marcus leaned against the railing, watching her water the plants. "You ever think about the trial?" he asked softly. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not with pain. More like gratitude. That it ended the way it did, not with hate, but with truth." He nodded slowly. "You know, I used to dream about confronting him. Making him pay." Naomi looked up. "And now?" "Now I think peace hurts him more than anger ever could." They shared a quiet laugh, not out of malice, but relief. That weekend, Naomi received a letter. The envelope was plain, no return address, the handwriting unfamiliar. Inside was a simple note. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say I see now what I destroyed, and what you rebuilt. You deserved better. I'm glad you found it." Naomi stared at the words for a long time. She didn't feel anger, not even pity, just closure. She folded the letter, placed it inside her journal, and whispered, "I already forgave you. I just never needed you to hear it." Months later, Naomi was invited to speak at a national conference for survivors' advocacy. She hesitated at first. Public stages still made her nervous. But Marcus encouraged her. "You've been telling everyone else to find their voice," he said. "Maybe it's time to use yours again." So she did, standing under bright lights, facing hundreds of faces, men and women who'd survived, fought, rebuilt. She began her speech not with statistics, but with truth. "I once thought survival meant pretending nothing happened," she said. "But healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without breaking. It means understanding that your story doesn't end with pain. It begins when you choose to rise from it." The crowd was silent, tears glistening in more than a few eyes. "My brother taught me that strength isn't in fists or fury," she continued. "It's in the moments when you choose peace over revenge, faith over fear, forgiveness over hate. Because peace doesn't mean the storm never came. It means you're no longer trapped inside it. When she stepped off stage, the applause was thunderous, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever felt unseen. That night, Marcus found her sitting by the hotel balcony, barefoot, hair down, city lights shimmering below. "You were incredible up there," he said. She smiled faintly. "I didn't do it for them," he nodded. "I know. You did it for her." Naomi tilted her head. "Her? The woman you used to be? The one who thought she wasn't strong enough?" She looked away, a tear slipping free. Maybe she was the strongest of all. A few months later, Naomi's story was adapted into a short documentary titled The Sound of Silence. It wasn't about abuse. It was about rebirth. The closing shot showed Naomi painting in her studio, sunlight streaming through the window, her brush gliding over a canvas of golden dawn. A voiceover, her own, played softly. "When the world broke me, I thought I'd never stand again. But sometimes being broken lets the light in, and in that light I learned survival is not weakness. It's courage in motion." The film received awards, but Naomi never sought fame. She donated every cent of her proceeds to shelters across the country. For her, the only reward that mattered was the knock on the Horizon Center's door. Every time a new survivor said, "I heard your story, and it gave me hope." Years rolled forward. Marcus eventually married and had a daughter, a bright, fearless girl named Hope. Naomi became her godmother. On Hope's 7th birthday, they all gathered at the Horizon Center's garden. Balloons floated in the air, laughter filled the yard, and Naomi stood by the mural again, the same one she'd painted years ago. Hope ran up to her, holding a paintbrush. "Aunt Naomi, can I add a flower?" Naomi smiled. "Of course, baby. What color?" "Blue, like the sky after the rain." Naomi laughed. "Perfect." Together they painted a tiny blue flower near the edge of the mural.